I signed my name with a shaking hand, thinking it was about his life, never imagining it was about mine. The hallway outside the surgical ward smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, the kind that sits too long on a hot plate. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to feel like it was inside my chest. My husband sat beside me, his knee bouncing, his fingers tapping against a thin manila folder he kept clutched to his chest like it was a life raft. "Baby," he said softly, not meeting my eyes, "before they take me back, I just need you to sign a few things." I remembered nodding. Of course I nodded. When a doctor tells you your husband needs surgery, unexpected surgery, you don't ask questions. You don't slow down. You don't think. You move on instinct and fear and love. He slid the papers toward me. I noticed they weren't clipped to a hospital chart. No logo, no letterhead, just clean white pages, dense with words that looked too small and too serious for my eyes to focus on. "What are these?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just precautionary stuff," he said. His smile was tight. "In case something happens." That should have stopped me. That should have made me read every word. But the nurse called his name, and suddenly there were people everywhere, moving fast, rolling him toward double doors that said, "Authorized personnel only." He squeezed my hand once, hard, and whispered, "Please, I trust you." So I signed. I signed my name 3 times. I dated each page. I didn't read past the first paragraph. And just like that, my life tilted on an axis I didn't even know existed. Before all that, my life was ordinary in the best way. Quiet mornings, loud evenings, 32 years of marriage built on routines that felt as natural as breathing. My husband, Charles, was never a flashy man. He wore his shoes until the soles went smooth. He drank his coffee black and too hot. Every Sunday morning, he read the newspaper front to back, folding it neatly when he was done, like it might be reused someday. I used to tease him about that, about how he treated everything like it might still have value if you were careful enough. We met young. I was 22, working the front desk at a dental office, and he came in for a chipped tooth. He smiled crooked, embarrassed, and apologized for bleeding on the paperwork. I liked him instantly. He asked me out 2 weeks later, and by the end of the year, we were married in my aunt's backyard with folding chairs and a cake my cousin baked herself. We built a life slowly, no shortcuts, no sudden windfalls, just work and patience and small joys. 2 children, a modest house with a creaky third step, and a lemon tree that never quite produced enough lemons. I worked as a school secretary for years, then part-time at the library once the kids were grown. Charles worked in logistics, numbers, schedules, contracts, things I never pretended to fully understand. But I trusted him completely. He handled the finances because he was good at it, or at least that's what we agreed. I signed our tax returns. I signed refinance paperwork years ago when interest rates dropped. I signed things because I believed our signatures meant the same thing. We're in this together. And for a long time, we were. The first real change came so quietly, I almost missed it. Charles started staying up late, long after I'd gone to bed. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and hear the low hum of his laptop from the dining room. When I asked him about it, he said work was restructuring, new systems, new responsibilities. "Just temporary," he said, rubbing his temples. "Once this quarter's over, it'll calm down." But it didn't. He grew distracted, guarded. He started taking phone calls in the garage, the door half closed, his voice dropping whenever I walked near. He stopped leaving papers around. No more envelopes on the counter, no files stacked by his chair. Everything went into a locked drawer in his home office. I told myself it was stress. Men his age worry differently, I thought. They carry things inside until it hardens. Then came the surgery. It wasn't planned. He collapsed one evening while taking out the trash, clutching his side, gasping like the air had been sucked out of him. At the ER, doctors spoke in careful phrases and quick glances. Internal bleeding, a complication from something he'd been managing quietly for months. I didn't like that phrase, managing quietly, but I pushed it aside. Survival does that to you. It narrows your world down to one thing. Please let him live. So when he asked me to sign those papers before surgery, I didn't hesitate. Love makes you brave and blind. The surgery took hours. I sat alone, staring at that same ticking clock, replaying his face as they wheeled him away, pale, afraid, human in a way I hadn't seen in years. When the surgeon finally came out, mask dangling from one ear, he said the words I'd been praying for. He's stable, recovery will take time, but he's going to be okay. I exhaled for the first time all day. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, after Charles was home, resting, sleeping most of the day, that the first envelope arrived. No return address, just my name, typed, perfectly centered. Inside was a copy of one of the documents I had signed, and at the top, in bold letters, were the words that made my knees buckle: Property Transfer Agreement. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands, the sound of the refrigerator buzzing too loud in the silence. This wasn't medical. This was something else entirely, and whatever I had signed that day in the hospital hallway, it was only the beginning. I read the document 3 times before the words started to make sense. Then I read it again, slower, as if the paper might change its mind if I stared hard enough. Property Transfer Agreement. My name, Charles's name, our address, the house we'd lived in for 27 years, the one where our children learned to walk, where pencil marks still faintly climbed the laundry room wall. The legal description ran on in stiff language, all commas and clauses, but one sentence landed like a blow to the chest. Grantor hereby transfers all rights, title, and interest. All. I pushed the paper away like it was hot. My hands were sweating, my palms slick. I stood up too fast and the room tilted. I had to grip the back of the chair until the dizziness passed. "This can't be right," I whispered to no one. Charles was asleep in the bedroom, the steady rhythm of his breathing drifting down the hallway. The doctor had warned me he'd be groggy for weeks, that anesthesia and pain medication would slow him down. I had been grateful for that, grateful for the quiet, for the chance to fuss over him, bring him soup, smooth his pillows. Now, listening to him sleep, I felt something else creep in alongside fear. Betrayal. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't wake him. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I let my emotions loose. The next morning, while Charles dozed in front of the television, I went to the garage and pulled out the old metal filing cabinet we hadn't opened in years. Dust puffed into the air as I tugged open drawers stiff with neglect. Inside were tax returns, insurance policies, warranties for appliances long gone. And then, tucked between a faded home inspection report and a stack of utility bills, I found more copies. Not just one agreement. 3, dated over the last 6 months, each one bearing my signature, except I hadn't signed them, at least not consciously. The signatures looked like mine, close enough that a stranger wouldn't question it, but something about the loops felt rushed, unnatural. My stomach dropped. I sat on the concrete floor, papers spread around me, the coolness seeping through my jeans. The garage smelled like oil and old cardboard, grounding and familiar. I needed that familiarity because my thoughts were spiraling. Had he forged my name, or had I signed without knowing? I remembered moments now, times he handed me papers while I was cooking dinner, while I was half listening, trusting. "Just initial here," he'd said. "Bank stuff." I'd laughed, wiped my hands on a towel, scribbled where he pointed. How many times had I done that? By noon, I couldn't sit still. I needed air, movement, clarity. I called my friend Marlene, told her I needed to run an errand, asked if she could sit with Charles for an hour. "Of course," she said. "How's he doing?" "Recovering," I replied. I didn't trust my voice with anything more. The county records office was quiet, fluorescent lit, the kind of place where whispers felt too loud. I waited in line behind a man arguing about property taxes, my heart thudding harder with every step forward. When it was my turn, I slid the address across the counter. "I need copies of any recent filings," I said. The clerk nodded, tapped at her keyboard, her nails clicking sharply. She frowned slightly at the screen. "Oh," she said, "looks like there was a transfer finalized last week." My ears rang. "Finalized?" "Yes, ma'am. Ownership transferred to an LLC." "Which LLC?" She turned the screen toward me. The name meant nothing to me, but beneath it, in smaller print, was a familiar name listed as managing partner. Charles. I left the building in a fog, clutching a folder thick with copies I didn't remember agreeing to. The sky was too bright, the world too loud, cars passed, people laughed. Life kept going, completely unaware that something fundamental had cracked inside me. By the time I got home, my hands were steady again, but my heart felt heavier, denser. Charles was awake, sipping water, Marlene chatting softly beside him. He smiled when he saw me. "There you are," he said. "You okay?" I looked at his face, paler than usual, lines deeper, eyes tired. This was the man I'd loved for more than half my life, the man who'd held my hand during childbirth, who'd cried quietly when his father died. I wanted him to tell me there was a mistake, that I'd misunderstood, that this was some temporary paperwork, some harmless technicality. Instead, I asked, "Charles, did you sell our house?" The room went silent. Marlene froze mid-sentence. Charles's smile faltered, not gone, just rearranged. "No," he said carefully, "I didn't sell it." "Then why is it no longer in my name?" I asked. My voice surprised me, calm, even, like I was asking about the weather. Marlene stood up slowly. "I'm going to check on the soup," she said, already backing toward the kitchen. Bless her for knowing when to disappear. Charles sighed. He set the glass down, his hands trembling slightly. "It's complicated," he replied. "No," I replied, "it's not. You either did this or you didn't." He looked away, at the wall, at the floor, anywhere but me. "I was trying to protect us," he said finally. "From what?" I asked. He swallowed. "From what's coming." Those words landed heavier than any confession, because whatever he was hiding, it wasn't over. It was still unfolding. And I had a terrible feeling that the papers I'd signed before surgery were only the surface of something much deeper, something he'd been preparing for long before he ever collapsed on that driveway. I sat down across from him, slow and deliberate, like any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile truth was hanging between us. "Protect us from what?" I asked again. Charles rubbed his hands together, a habit he had when he was stalling. I'd seen it 100 times, during tough conversations with the kids, before asking for a loan from his brother, right before bad news. "I didn't want to burden you," he said. "You've always had enough on your plate." That sentence lit a quiet anger in me, not the explosive kind, something colder, sharper. "You don't get to decide what I can carry," I said, "not after 32 years. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I made some bad decisions," he said. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. "How bad?" I asked. He hesitated. Then, in a rush, like he was afraid he'd lose the nerve, he said, "I borrowed money, more than I should have." My mind immediately went to the usual suspects: credit cards, a loan against his retirement, maybe a risky investment he didn't want to admit had failed. "How much?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, slowly, and walked to the window. Outside, the lemon trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, completely unaware of the conversation happening inside. "Enough that if I hadn't moved things around," he said, "we would have lost everything." Moved things around. That was his phrase for betrayal. You transferred the house into an LLC, your LLC. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. And you had me sign documents I didn't understand while you were about to go under anesthesia. He flinched at that. I was scared. I didn't know if I'd make it through surgery. If I died, I needed everything already in place. In place for who? I asked, because it sure wasn't me. He turned to face me then, his shoulders slumped. For you, he insisted, for us. I let out a small, humorless laugh. Charles, if that were true, you wouldn't have hidden it. Silence stretched between us. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and indifferent. Who do you owe? I asked. He shook his head. You don't need to know that. I need to know everything, I said. You don't get secrets anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Years ago, when my company started outsourcing, I got nervous. I thought layoffs were coming. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to worry. So you worried alone, I said quietly. Yes. And then a guy I knew, someone I'd worked with before, came to me with an opportunity, short-term lending, high return. My stomach sank. You invested. I loaned money, he corrected. At first, it worked. The returns were good. I used them to pay off debts, to keep us comfortable. You never noticed because I never let anything slip. I thought of the vacations we'd taken in those years, the new appliances, the easy yeses when the kids asked for help. And then? I asked. And then it went bad, he said, really bad. The man disappeared. The money didn't. It turned into something else. Interest, penalties, threats disguised as friendly reminders. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. You're saying someone dangerous is involved, I said. He nodded once. Not violent, he said quickly. Not like that, but persistent, relentless. So you hid the house. You moved it out of reach. Yes, I thought if it wasn't technically ours, they couldn't touch it. But it is ours. It's our home. It was, he said softly. That word, was, echoed in my head. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink. My hands were shaking now, no matter how much I tried to steady them. You risked our future, and you took away my right to choose. I was trying to save us, he said again, weaker this time. You were trying to control the damage. There's a difference. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering how many nights he'd lain awake with this secret while I slept peacefully beside him. In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. If Charles had been planning in secret, then so would I. The next day, while he napped, I called a lawyer. Her name was Denise, and her voice was steady, unhurried. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything, from the hospital hallway to the LLC paperwork to Charles's confession. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. You're not powerless, she said finally, but what he did is serious. Illegal? I asked. Potentially, she said, especially if consent was obtained under false pretenses. False pretenses. That phrase settled into me like a seed. Denise asked me to bring in everything I had, copies, originals, emails, anything with dates and signatures. As I'd gathered the documents, I realized how carefully Charles had planned this, how methodical he'd been, and how completely he'd underestimated me. That evening, as I stacked the papers neatly on the dining room table, Charles watched me from the couch. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Taking responsibility." "For what?" he asked. "For my life," I replied. He looked afraid then, not from creditors, not from paperwork, but from me. And that was the moment I knew, whatever came next, I was no longer the woman who signed without reading. Denise's office smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. The chairs were firm, the kind meant to keep you alert, not comfortable. I sat across from her desk with a manila folder in my lap, my life reduced to paper and ink. She adjusted her glasses and flipped through the documents one by one, her face neutral, professional. The only sound in the room was the soft shuffle of pages. "This one," she said, tapping a page, "is the most concerning." I leaned forward. "Why?" "Because it was signed while your husband was under medical duress," she said, "and because it materially alters your rights without disclosure." My throat tightened. "So it matters that he told me it was medical?" "Yes," she said simply. "Intent matters." I exhaled slowly. For the first time since the hospital hallway, I felt something close to relief, not because the situation was good, but because it was real, defined, grounded in something other than confusion. "What are my options?" I asked. She folded her hands. "You can contest the transfer, possibly reverse it, but that will expose everything." "Everything?" I repeated. "The debt, the creditors, the LLC, his financial decisions." She met my eyes. "There will be consequences." I thought of Charles sitting at home, wrapped in a blanket, pretending to recover. I thought of the neighbors who waved every morning, of our children who still believed their parents were steady, unshakable. "I'm not trying to punish him. I just want what's mine." Denise nodded. "Justice doesn't have to be loud." When I got home, Charles was sitting at the dining table, staring at the same stack of papers I'd left behind. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes searching my face for answers I wasn't ready to give. "You went to a lawyer," he said. "I did," I replied, hanging my coat. "You're serious about this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He rubbed his chest absently near the scar beneath his shirt. "If you do this," he said, "they'll come after me harder." "They're already coming after you," I said. "You just hid it from me." We sat in silence, the weight of unsaid things pressing down on us. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't think you'd fight me," he said. That hurt more than anything else. "I thought I'd disappear?" I asked quietly. "Or just accept it?" He said, "I thought you'd understand, like you always do." I shook my head. Understanding doesn't mean surrender. Over the next week, the house filled with tension. We moved around each other carefully, like furniture had been rearranged and neither one of us quite knew the new layout. Our children called, sensing something was off. I told them their father was recovering, that everything else was fine. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. Denise filed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, Charles received the first call. I was in the kitchen when his phone rang. I watched his face as he listened, the color draining slowly, his jaw tightening. "Yes," he said, "I understand." When he hung up, he didn't look at me. "They know," he said. "They were always going to," I replied. By Wednesday, letters arrived, official ones, the kind with heavy paper and precise language, notices, requests, a summons. Charles stopped sleeping again. He paced at night, sat in the dark, stared at walls. I watched him with a strange mix of pity and distance. Love doesn't disappear all at once. It thins, stretches, reshapes itself into something unfamiliar. The real turning point came when our son, Marcus, showed up unannounced. He stood in the doorway, tall and serious, eyes flicking between us. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Charles opened his mouth, then closed it. I took a breath. "Sit down," I said. We told him enough, not everything, but enough, that his face hardened, his posture straightening like he was bracing himself. "You did what?" Marcus asked his father. "I was trying to fix a mistake," Charles said. "By making another one?" Marcus shot back. I placed my hand on Marcus's arm. "This isn't about choosing sides. It's about honesty." Marcus looked at me then, really looked. "Did he trick you?" he asked. I hesitated just for a second. "Yes," I said. That word changed the air in the room. By the end of the month, the truth was no longer contained within our walls. Family knew, a few close friends knew, whispers traveled the way they always do, quietly, then all at once. Charles's creditors began formal proceedings. The LLC was scrutinized. The property transfer was flagged. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, Charles came out and sat beside me. "I thought I was being smart," he said. "I know," I replied. "I didn't think it would cost me you," he said. I stared out at the yard, at the lemon tree heavy with fruit we hadn't picked. "I didn't think you'd risk me," I said. We sat there as the light faded, both of us facing the consequences of choices made in silence. And as much as it hurt, I knew this part, the exposure, the reckoning, was necessary. Because secrets don't protect marriages. Truth does. The court date was set for early spring, when the air still held a bite, but the trees were already thinking about blooming. I remembered that detail because it felt symbolic in a way I didn't have words for yet. Everything cold and exposed, but on the edge of change. Denise prepared me carefully. She never promised outcomes. She explained processes, steps, possibilities. "What matters most," she said, sliding a yellow legal pad toward me, "is that you stay grounded. This isn't about anger. It's about clarity." Clarity came slowly. In depositions, Charles had to answer questions he'd spent years avoiding, even from himself. Dates, amounts, names, decisions he'd justified in the dark now sat under fluorescent lights, stripped of intention and reduced to fact. I didn't attend every session. Denise told me I didn't have to, but I went to enough to understand something important. Charles hadn't just been afraid of losing money. He'd been afraid of losing control. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, he sat across from me in the car, hands resting on the steering wheel, though the engine was off. "I thought if I could just manage it long enough," he said, staring straight ahead, "I could fix it before you ever had to know." "And if you couldn't?" I asked. He swallowed. "Then at least it wouldn't be your fault." That was the closest he came to admitting what he'd done to me. The house remained in limbo during the proceedings, technically still tied up, technically still ours, but fragile, like a vase already cracked, waiting for the wrong vibration. I walked through it differently then. I noticed things I'd stopped seeing years ago. The dent in the hallway wall from when Marcus learned to ride his bike inside. The faded patch of carpet where our daughter spilled nail polish at 16 and cried like the world was ending. I realized I'd been living in memory as much as in the present. Friends checked in carefully, unsure what to say. Some avoided the topic entirely, others asked too many questions. I learned which ones listened without needing details, and I held on to them. Marlene brought casseroles, even though no one was sick anymore. "Just in case you forget to eat," she said. I almost laughed at that. Forgetting to eat was the least of my problems. Forgetting who I was, that had been the real danger. The day of the hearing arrived quietly. No dramatic music, no raised voices, just a courtroom that smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. I sat beside Denise, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Charles sat across the room, his shoulders slumped, his face older somehow, smaller. When the judge spoke, her voice was calm, precise. She acknowledged the medical context, the misleading presentation of documents, the imbalance of information. She ruled that the property transfer was invalid. Just like that. Invalid. The word echoed through me, loosening something I'd been holding tight for months. Ownership was restored. The LLC was dissolved. The house, my house, was legally mine again. But victories in court don't feel the way people imagine. There was no rush of joy, just a deep, steady exhale. Outside, the sun was warm on my face. Denise shook my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. I nodded. "I know." Charles didn't approach me right away. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him. But belief doesn't undo damage. We separated not long after, not with slammed doors or dramatic speeches, but with quiet logistics. A spare bedroom at first, then a small apartment for him across town. Our children adjusted in their own ways. There were hard conversations, tears, long pauses on the phone, but there was also understanding, especially when they saw me standing on my own feet again. I stayed in the house. I repainted the bedroom, gave away furniture that carried too much weight, planted herbs in the backyard where the lemon tree was still standing, stubborn and alive. Sometimes in the evenings, I sat on the porch alone and listened to the neighborhood settle into itself. The same sounds as before, dogs, distant laughter, wind through leaves, but I heard them differently now. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to tell me what was safe. I had learned the hard way that love without transparency is not protection, that trust must be mutual, not assumed, and that signing your name, whether on paper or in a marriage, should never be done blindly. Charles and I still speak, carefully, kindly, from a distance that feels earned. We share grandchildren now. We share history, but we no longer share illusions. And strangely enough, that has brought a kind of peace, because the truth once spoken stops haunting you. It lets you rest. The quiet after everything settled was the strangest part. For weeks, months really, my life had been measured in documents, deadlines, and guarded conversations. Then suddenly there was space. Empty mornings, evenings with no phone calls from Denise, no envelopes stamped urgent, no tension humming through the walls. At first, that quiet felt dangerous, like something was missing that I might still need. I found myself waking early, out of habit, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the refrigerator cycle on and off. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't reach for my phone. I just sat there, learning how to be alone inside my own life again. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small, almost invisible ways. The first time I laughed without immediately feeling guilty, I noticed it. It surprised me, came out of nowhere, a sharp little burst while Marlene and I were walking through the farmer's market. She'd made some comment about overpriced tomatoes, and I laughed like the sound had been waiting somewhere deep inside me. Then I cried in the car afterward, not because I was sad, but because I realized how long it had been since I'd felt light. I started making changes that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choice. I rearranged the living room, took down photos that felt like artifacts instead of memories, put up new curtains. Nothing dramatic, just something that let more light in. I took a class at the community center, writing, not because I thought I had a story worth telling, but because Denise had said something to me one afternoon that stuck. "You've spent a long time being careful with other people's truths," she said. "It might be time to explore your own." In that class, I learned how much I'd edited myself over the years, how often I'd softened edges, skipped details, filled in silence for others. Writing forced me to sit with discomfort, to let moments stand on their own without explaining them away. Some nights I still thought about Charles, not with anger, not even with longing, just curiosity. How two people could share a life so completely and still be holding entirely different maps. We met for coffee once, months later, neutral ground, a cafe near the park. He looked healthier, thinner, quieter. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd misunderstand his presence. "I know," I said. We talked about the grandchildren, about books we were reading, about nothing important. Before we parted, he looked at me with something close to humility. "You were right," he said, "about control, about everything." I nodded. "I wish you'd trusted me enough to let me help." "So do I," he said. That was enough. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means releasing yourself from carrying what no longer belongs to you. The house began to feel like mine in ways it never had before, not because Charles was gone, but because I was fully present in it. I hosted dinners again, smaller ones, intimate, conversations that went deep and stayed there. I spoke more honestly with my children, too, not unloading everything, but not protecting them from reality either. "You taught us something," my daughter said one night as we washed dishes together. "What's that?" I asked. "You taught us that love doesn't mean silence and that asking questions isn't betrayal." I stood there for a moment, hands in soapy water, letting that sink in. Maybe this story wasn't just mine. Maybe it would ripple outward in ways I'd never see. Sometimes late at night, I thought back to that hospital hallway, the smell of bleach, the ticking clock, the manila folder in my husband's hands. I thought about the woman I was then, tired, scared, trusting. I don't judge her. She loved deeply. She believed in partnership. Those aren't weaknesses. They only become dangerous when they're taken advantage of. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to be harder or colder or suspicious of everyone she loves. I'd tell her this: read what you sign, ask what you don't understand, and never confuse urgency with honesty. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not, but healing, real healing, comes when we choose ourselves without bitterness. And I did. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the evening light stretches long across the floor, I think about how close I came to losing more than a home. I could have lost my voice, my sense of self, my right to question what didn't feel right. What happened to me didn't start with cruelty. It started with love mixed with fear and silence. And that combination can be far more dangerous than anger ever is. I stayed because I believed in marriage. I signed because I trusted the man I built a life with. And I learned, slowly, painfully, that trust without transparency isn't safety, it's risk. If you're listening to my story and something in your chest feels tight, I want you to pause with that feeling, not to panic, not to accuse, but to pay attention, because intuition speaks quietly and it doesn't repeat itself forever. Love should never require you to disappear. Protection should never come wrapped in secrecy, and partnership should never ask you to surrender your awareness. I didn't win because I fought. I won because I woke up. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not a courtroom ruling, not a separation, not even forgiveness, but clarity. The kind that lets you sleep at night without replaying conversations in your head. The kind that lets you sign your own name again, knowing exactly what it means. So now I want to ask you something. Honestly, if you were sitting in that hospital hallway, if the person you loved most slid papers toward you and said, "Just sign, it's for us," would you have read them? Did this story speak to you? Did it remind you of something you've lived or something you're living right now? Thank you for sitting with me through this story, for listening, and for supporting this channel. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I read them more than you know. And if you haven't already, subscribe and stay with us, because sometimes hearing someone else's truth helps us finally face our own.